Welcome to Life Black Aspect, your ultimate destination for gripping storytelling. Dive into a world of suspense, drama, and intense emotions as we unravel captivating tales, focusing on wife-cheating horror stories and thrilling narratives that keep you on the edge of your seat. Whether you're here for shocking twists, chilling revelations, or thought-provoking plots, Life Black Aspect is your gateway to unforgettable storytelling experiences. Subscribe now and let the stories take over. Hey guys, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Now, let's dive into the story. The scent of freshly turned earth and the hum of machinery were constants in my childhood. My earliest memories are laced with the rhythm of my father's landscaping work, a mix of grit, precision, and artistry. Summer's landscaping wasn't just a business. It was a legacy I was destined to inherit, though I didn't realize it at the time. My father's unrelenting work ethic set a standard I'd spend years trying to meet, often without realizing how much of my life it consumed. By the time I was 10, I was sorting invoices and shadowing the crew, watching my father lead by example. There was a raw satisfaction in creating something beautiful out of chaos, in transforming barren yards into lush, vibrant spaces. As I grew older, I found myself increasingly drawn to the hands-on work, preferring the sun on my back and dirt under my nails to the sterile confines of an office. Computers are both a blessing and a challenge. They streamline tasks like managing invoices, payroll, and client information, making business operations more efficient while reducing the need for extra staff. However, when they fail or files get corrupted, chaos follows. Over the years, I've dealt with my fair share of tech mishaps in my family's landscaping business. Fortunately, I've learned to safeguard data with local and cloud backups, ensuring minimal disruption. I'm Donald Summers, Donna most, Donnie only to my wife and mother. At 35, I run Summers Landscaping, a business my father founded. As an only child, I grew up closely involved, first helping in the office, then working in the field as my father insisted. That experience shaped my love for hands-on labor. By high school, I was managing crews, and when I officially took over 7 years ago, I expanded services, growing the business. I expanded the business to 12 teams handling everything from landscaping to snow removal. While my role has shifted to more administrative duties, I still prefer being outdoors. Peak seasons require more office time, especially during tax season when I'm buried in paperwork. This year, my mother, who used to handle bookkeeping for my father, was helping, but her unfamiliarity with computers led to a mishap. She accidentally deleted critical files. Thankfully, my backup systems worked, but restoring everything took time. While waiting for the process to complete, I opened Google Earth, a tool I often use to get an overhead view of project sites. With some extra time on my hands, I decided to check out my house, considering a long-planned pool project now that my kids, Danielle and Brian, were older. That's when I noticed something strange, a car parked in my driveway that I didn't recognize. The satellite image, taken recently during winter, showed the garage addition I had completed just months earlier. The car was red, but I couldn't determine the make or model. It struck me as odd since I was familiar with most of my wife Brittany's friends. Curious, I switched to Street View, knowing it was unlikely to be from the same day, but I had time to spare. That's when everything fell apart. The updated Street View image showed my wife standing at the front door with another man. They were close, intimately so, and her hand was unmistakably placed on him in a way no married woman should touch someone who wasn't her husband. Rage hit me instantly, but I forced myself to stay calm. I printed multiple copies of the image before taking a closer look. The man's face wasn't clearly visible, but something about him seemed familiar. After a few moments, it clicked. He resembled Brittany's college boyfriend, Ben Clausen, a former football star. Suppressing my anger, I focused on finding the truth. I knew the usual tactics: installing cameras, recording conversations, even hiring a private investigator. Given the flexibility of my job, I could easily monitor things myself. But before making any decisions, I needed more information. I turned to the internet, and a simple search revealed more than I expected: Photos, career details, and personal information, all easily accessible. The ease of gathering this data made me wonder how private investigators still stayed in business. But at that moment, I wasn't interested in that. I was too consumed by the need to uncover the full truth. Ben Clausen had built a solid reputation in real estate after an unsuccessful attempt at an NFL career, which had been cut short by a knee injury. He initially moved to Denver, but returned to our hometown 2 years ago to start his own agency. From what was publicly available, he seemed to be thriving. His charm and good looks likely helped in sales. He was also married, with a young son. His wife, Angela Clausen, worked as an accountant for his firm. She was an attractive woman with honey-brown curls, green eyes, and noticeable dimples when she smiled. Slightly fuller than Brittany but far from overweight, she had a professional air that suggested she was more than just a supporting spouse. Thinking about his career, a disturbing realization hit me. A realtor's schedule allowed plenty of time away from the office while always knowing where his wife was. It was an ideal setup for an affair. The suspicion gnawed at me, but I needed proof. Without overthinking, I called his office, only to be told he was out showing a property and wouldn't return for over an hour. That was enough confirmation. His time was unaccounted for. Though I didn't have concrete evidence, the image from Google Earth left little room for doubt. Brittany had been intimate with another man, and that man bore an uncanny resemblance to her ex-boyfriend. The more I thought about it, the stronger my urge to act. Grabbing the printed photo, I headed to my truck. But before pulling out, I spotted my son's toy car in the passenger seat, a stark reminder of the life I had built and what was now at risk. The toy car was a stark reminder that whatever happened next would impact more than just my marriage. My children deserve stability, no matter what. Pushing my emotions aside, I drove to Clausen's office, a sleek space on the 5th floor of a newly built downtown complex, ironically, one of my company's landscaping projects. As I entered the building, a foreman from my crew gave me a curious look, likely surprised to see me heading inside instead of checking on the worksite. But I had a different mission. Inside, I immediately drew attention. My size alone made me stand out among the office workers in their suits and skirts. Ignoring the stares, I stepped into Clausen Real Estate, where Angela Clausen sat at the reception desk. She looked much like her photos but leaner, her polished business attire reinforcing her professional demeanor. She greeted me with a firm handshake, making confident eye contact, a sign of someone accustomed to handling clients. I wasted no time introducing myself and handing her the photo. Her expression shifted from curiosity to quiet understanding, then to something darker. After studying the image, she confirmed what I already suspected. The man with Brittany was almost certainly her husband. When I mentioned that the photo was no older than 3 months, her interest sharpened. I pointed out Brittany's earrings, my Christmas gift to her, as proof of the timeline. A long silence followed before Angela admitted she had doubts of her own. She asked if I had confronted Brittany, but I hadn't yet. According to her schedule, she was supposed to be at work. Angela, however, challenged that assumption. Was she really there? She asked, something in her tone making me pause. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and called Brittany. No answer. Next, I dialed the gym where she worked. Mandy, a trainer and mutual friend, picked up. The hesitation in her voice was immediate. When I asked for Brittany, Mandy faltered before revealing that Brittany had left minutes ago, supposedly to meet me for lunch. But I hadn't made any such plans. When I pressed for details, Mandy reluctantly mentioned the restaurant Brittany had named. Hanging up, I turned to Angela. She was watching me closely. What did she say? She asked. I took a breath, steadying myself. Wait a second, I replied. Suspicion turned into certainty when I checked the Find My Phone app. Brittany's phone was at her house. Given that she had it when she left that morning, she hadn't simply forgotten it. She was home. I shared my discovery with Angela, watching as her anger deepened. Without hesitation, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the office door. I barely kept up as she instructed her assistant to call if Ben returned before she did. In the elevator, she shot me a furious glance but told me to drive, admitting she wasn't in the right state of mind. She had forgiven Ben for past infidelities once before, back in Colorado, but she wasn't feeling so forgiving today. The drive was mostly silent until Angela spoke, surprised that Brittany would take such a risk by bringing Ben to our home. I explained that Brittany knew my routine well. This time of year, I rarely left the office, and even if I did, I always called first. That gave her plenty of time to cover her tracks. The realization stung. I had been so trusting, so predictable, that if this had been going on for years, I would never have noticed. Angela pointed out that most affairs leave signs, but I had seen none. Our intimacy hadn't changed. Her behavior toward me and the kids seemed normal, and she didn't take unexplained trips or have late nights with friends. Angela admitted Ben hadn't shown the classic red flags either. That only made it worse. As I turned onto my street, my suspicions were confirmed. A red car sat in the driveway. "That's Ben's car," Angela muttered, her voice a mix of fury and quiet devastation. Parking a few houses down, I exchanged a glance with her. Before heading to the yard, Angela followed, camera in hand, clearly intent on documenting whatever we were about to find. Slipping through the back entrance, we entered the house in silence. Then we heard it, Brittany's voice. The unmistakable sounds of pleasure. My anger hardened, but underneath it, something inside me cracked. I motioned for Angela to follow as we crept toward the living room. When I finally peered inside, expecting to see Ben with my wife, I froze. Brittany was sprawled on the couch, lost in pleasure. But it wasn't Ben between her thighs. It was another woman. Shock paralyzed me. Across the room, Ben stood against the wall, recording the entire scene on a tablet while pleasuring himself. Angela wasted no. Shaking, Jamie covered herself with trembling hands. I'm sorry," she stammered. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "This is only the second time, I swear," she pleaded. It wasn't supposed to happen at all. Disgust twisted in my gut. Cheating was cheating. It didn't matter if it was with a man or a woman. Brittany had betrayed me, and now there was no turning back. As soon as Ben's tablet hit the floor, I picked it up, realizing it held everything I needed. Jamie, pale and terrified, understood the consequences immediately. Without giving her a chance to argue, I forced her to leave the house, making sure her humiliation was complete. Through the window, I recorded her scrambling to dress before running to her parents' home. With most neighbors at work, she was lucky to avoid an audience. Turning back to Ben, I saw him lying at the base of the couch, his left foot swollen and clearly broken. Despite his pain, his expression shifted when he noticed Angela standing in the doorway, filming everything. He knew there was no way out. A brief moment of false friendliness from me only served to unnerve him further. When I nudged his injured leg with my boot, Angela intervened, pointing out the severity of his injury. She warned that if the swelling worsened, a clot could form, something that could be fatal. She was right, but I had no intention of letting him off that easily. Death was an escape. Suffering lasted longer. Brittany sat curled on the couch, trembling. The weight of betrayal sat heavy in my chest, but I wasn't about to let her hide from the consequences. Without hesitation, I called her parents, telling them to come immediately. George, her father, instantly understood something was wrong. He agreed without hesitation, urging me not to do anything rash. My own parents received the same call, and though the conversation was nearly identical, my father grasped the situation before I could explain. When they arrived, his face was set in stone. My father's silent presence and firm grip on my shoulders spoke louder than words. Brittany, overcome with shame, tried to cover herself, but I refused to let her escape that easily. Angela, focused on the immediate issue, insisted that Ben needed medical attention. Knowing she wouldn't back down, I compromised by agreeing to call an ambulance, buying just enough time to ensure Brittany's parents saw the full truth before medical help arrived. As expected, my mother's first reaction was horror. My father, however, processed everything in seconds, offering quiet support rather than questions. Brittany, desperate, pleaded for understanding, but I had none left to give. Whatever illusion of a marriage we once had was shattered beyond repair. Minutes later, her parents arrived, and with them, the final reckoning began. Brittany's parents, George and Virginia, stepped inside, their concern evident. Virginia was visibly shocked to see her daughter curled up on the couch, while George seemed less surprised. Whether he had suspected something all along was unclear, but he remained composed as Virginia demanded an explanation. As expected, Brittany remained silent, unwilling or unable to justify herself. I laid everything out, how my morning had unfolded, the unexpected discovery through satellite imagery, the online search that led me to Angela, and finally, what I had walked into in my own home. The room fell silent, but it didn't last. Virginia refused to believe it at first, insisting there had to be some mistake. I offered proof, ready to play the footage, but my mother intervened. She urged me not to, saying it wouldn't change anything and would only cause more harm. While she had a point, I wasn't about to let anyone question the truth. Before I could press forward, George cut in, asking the only question that really mattered: what I planned to do next. Divorce was the only option. There was no going back. There was no coming back from this. I refused to live with the betrayal or even pretend to tolerate it. In the background, Angela helped bend his feet, gathering his things while he limped out in nothing but his socks, a fitting walk of shame. George's expression hardened as I laid out my terms. I wanted full custody of our children, with Brittany getting visitation, but they would live with me. Virginia tried to argue, but I shut it down immediately. I made it clear I wasn't asking. If they wanted to fight me on this, Brittany's private footage would become very public. Brittany's humiliation turned to anger as she finally lashed out, but I wasn't backing down. The argument escalated into shouting, dragging on for hours until I checked the time. The kids would be home soon. This needed to end. I told Brittany to clean herself up before they arrived. She refused, claiming she would tell them her own version of events. I gave her a final warning, then walked toward the office, making sure she and everyone else understood what would happen if she pushed me further. Brittany panicked, rushing after me, realizing I wasn't bluffing. Desperation filled her voice as she tried to negotiate, but it was too late for that. She begged me not to go through with my threats, insisting I still loved her. That was a lie she told herself. Whatever love had once existed between us had been shattered beyond repair. When she tried to argue that I could never truly hate her, I didn't hesitate in my response. I would never forgive her. And if she didn't give me everything I demanded in the divorce, I would make sure she regretted every second of her betrayal. A cruel thought crossed my mind, and I voiced it without hesitation. Were our children even mine? Brittany recoiled, horrified, but I no longer trusted a word she said. If she could hide one betrayal, she could hide more. As I returned to the living room, I overheard Virginia pleading with my father, hoping he could convince me to back down. His response was exactly what I needed to hear. I expected that my father had no sympathy for Brittany. What she did was unforgivable, and she would face the consequences. Virginia made one last attempt, insisting that the children needed their mother, but I shut her down with cold indifference. Their defense of Brittany didn't matter. If they wanted to fight, they knew what was at stake. The realization finally set in, leaving them shaken. Predictably, things didn't go the way I wanted in court. Brittany underestimated how far I would go, calling my bluff about the video. The problem was I wasn't bluffing. When the judge awarded her custody, she smiled triumphantly, convinced she had won. I simply smiled back. Within hours, I uploaded the footage to every adult site I could find, using Ben's tablet and email to spread the links far and wide. Every member of Brittany's family, every friend, and even Ben's social media contacts received a copy. Once the damage was irreversible, I discarded the tablet, ensuring there was no trail leading back to me. She thought she had won. She had no idea what real consequences looked like. After the video went viral, Brittany became an unfortunate celebrity in certain online circles. Within a month, she lost her job at the gym. Though she still retained custody of the kids, the divorce had been finalized before she was fired, sparing me from paying spousal support. A small victory, but one I gladly took. She made a failed attempt to claim a stake in my family's business, not realizing that I didn't own it. My father did. I simply managed operations while he paid my salary. Since I had never personally invested in the company, there was nothing for her to take. She walked away with half of our savings and checking accounts, but couldn't afford to keep the house. Thanks to my lawyer, we were forced to sell it, splitting the proceeds. She bought a smaller place in the same school district, and I did the same, cutting expenses wherever possible to afford the child support payments. Despite the upheaval, Daniel and Brian adjusted well, even if they weren't happy about their mother and me living separately. I kept them busy: bike rides, hikes, trips to the park, and occasional visits to the aquatic center. They still brought up their mother, trying to bridge the gap, but I never encouraged it. They didn't know the real reason for our divorce, and I wanted to keep it that way. Personally, I struggled with loneliness. Brittany and I had shared a passionate relationship, and after the divorce, I started dating again. Finding dates wasn't difficult, but real connections were rare. The physical side was fine, but something was missing. Casual encounters got old fast. I wanted something real. 6 months later, I ran into Mandy Thomas at the grocery store. She had worked with Brittany at the gym and had always been friendly. As we chatted, I noticed the way she looked at me different from before. She was single now, and when she asked if I was seeing anyone, I admitted I hadn't found anything serious. One thing led to another, and I invited her over for dinner. She accepted without hesitation. Mandy changed everything. She was smart, funny, and a fierce lover. More importantly, she understood me. We agreed to be exclusive after just a few dates, and I hadn't regretted it for a second. For the first time since the divorce, I felt whole again. A few months into our relationship, I got a call from Brittany's father, George. He and Virginia had the kids, but Brittany had been hospitalized and they needed me to pick them up. He hesitated, expecting me to ask what was wrong, but I didn't care enough to ask. It wasn't a physical illness. She had been admitted to a psychiatric facility. The news barely registered. As long as it didn't affect the kids, it wasn't my problem. On the drive to pick them up, I found myself thinking about Brittany for the first time in a long while. I had never truly understood why she destroyed our marriage. The usual reasons didn't add up. She wasn't chasing money, attention, or excitement. Our intimacy had been frequent and satisfying, and I had never cheated or mistreated her. Even if she had an attraction to women, that didn't explain her involvement with Ben. No matter how many times I replayed it in my mind, I never found a good answer. But at that point, it didn't matter. I had moved on. Brittany was just a painful chapter in my past, one I had no intention of revisiting. The moment I saw Brittany with someone else, our marriage ended. Infidelity was unforgivable, and I had no interest in understanding or justifying it. If someone couldn't stay faithful, they had no business being married. Staying with her would have meant losing all self-respect. Arriving at my former in-laws' house pulled me out of my thoughts. As I pulled up, the front door swung open, and my children, Daniel and Brian, stood waiting. Their body language immediately signaled something was wrong. Brian clung to his older brother, while Daniel protectively wrapped an arm around him. Though they were close, this wasn't normal behavior. Behind them, George stood stiffly, one hand resting on each child's shoulder. His expression was bitter and full of anger. As I approached, he instructed the kids to go inside and pack their things before turning to face me. His usual composed demeanor was gone. His anger boiled over as he accused me of being heartless, showing no concern for Brittany's hospitalization. To him, I was responsible for everything that had happened to her: the viral video, the job loss, and now her mental collapse. But I had warned them all. Brittany made her choices, and she was paying the price. When George grabbed me by the vest, I pried his hand off with ease, making it clear I wouldn't tolerate aggression. He seemed to realize his mistake and backed off, his anger fading into exhaustion. He admitted that blaming me was easier than facing the truth about his daughter. Then he told me why Brittany was in the hospital. She had attempted self-destruction. Daniel had found her unconscious in bed after overdosing on sleeping pills. He had called emergency services, likely saving her life. The weight of that hit me harder than I expected. My anger toward Brittany remained, but my heart ached for my kids. No child should have to experience that. George explained that Daniel had barely left Brian's side since it happened. They were struggling. I promised to keep a close eye on them. Over the next few days, I spoke with them about what had happened. Brittany was eventually discharged, deemed stable, but I had my doubts. A few therapy sessions and medication didn't erase the issues that led her to such a drastic decision. She wanted to resume joint custody, and while Daniel hesitated, Brian was eager to see his mother again. Mandy, ever the rational one, reminded me that fighting in court would be long and exhausting. While I despised the idea of Brittany having access to the kids again, I couldn't justify keeping them from her. Brian wanted his mother in his life, and Daniel would stay by his side to protect him. Mandy and I had grown close over the months. She was everything I had wanted: strong, intelligent, passionate, and incredible with my kids. She had become a central part of my life, and I finally decided to take the next step. One night, after a quiet conversation, I pulled out a ring and asked her to marry me. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Her smile faded, and she closed the ring box gently. She cared for me, but marriage wasn't in her plans. She admitted she had never seriously considered it, and if she ever did, it wouldn't be with a man who had children and an ex-wife still in the picture. She had enjoyed our time together, but saw it as something temporary, not a lifelong commitment. What I had thought was love had been, for her, a fun relationship without long-term expectations. She had offered exclusivity not out of deeper affection, but to avoid casual risks. The weight of Mandy's rejection hit me harder than I expected. I had been so sure, so hopeful, but in the end, I had misread everything. She had never seen our relationship as anything more than a good time, and now she was gone. I didn't try to stop her. There was nothing left to say. When she turned away from my goodbye kiss, it was clear there was no going back. The weeks after were rough. I had been through breakups before, but this one stung differently. Mandy was the first woman I had truly connected with after my divorce, and losing that left an ache I couldn't shake. The kids noticed her absence immediately, asking why she had left, why she had said no, why we wouldn't see her again. I told them it wasn't about them, that it was my fault, and left it at that. Daniel, now 10, seemed to understand more than he let on, but didn't press for details. Brian, on the other hand, clung to any chance to rebuild our family, bringing up his mother at every opportunity. It was his way of hoping things could go back to the way they were. Life moved on. I went on dates, made sure there were no misunderstandings, and kept things casual. But my situation, a divorced man with kids and a mentally unstable ex, wasn't appealing to most women. Some single moms showed interest until they learned about Brittany, then quickly lost enthusiasm. I understood. No one wanted unnecessary drama. Still, it made for a lonely life. Angela and I stayed in touch. She had divorced Ben, though she handled it with far more grace than I had with Brittany. She didn't fight for their oversized house, seeing it as a reminder of the past, so they sold it and split the money. She also chose to keep her stake in Ben's real estate firm rather than take a higher alimony payout, keeping her office job but minimizing contact with him. She had moved on, proving to be far stronger than I was. Ben, surprisingly, didn't suffer the same infamy as Brittany from the leaked video. His business carried on, and Angela never. Angela never brought it up, so neither did I. She never condemned me for what I had done, though I knew she disapproved. She had hoped I would use the footage as leverage, not actually release it. When I did, she had been furious, but kept her thoughts to herself. In the end, she had been right. I never won full custody. Brittany would never willingly give that up. Despite our shared history of betrayal, Angela and I were never more than friends. We were too different and we both knew it. Instead, she became someone I could rely on, someone who understood. Her son, Robert, spent a lot of time at my house since he and Brian were in the same class. Through it all, Angela remained a steady presence. One day, during a visit, she found the ring box I had tossed aside after Mandy's rejection. I had never bothered looking for it. It wasn't worth the effort. She placed it on the table, raising an eyebrow as if demanding an explanation. Sighing, I told her everything. How I had proposed, how Mandy had turned me down, and how it had all fallen apart. She listened without interrupting, then simply shook her head. She sympathized, but I shrugged it off. I had always been terrible at choosing the right women. The only one who had ever wanted me for the long haul had turned out to be a cheater. Angela laughed bitterly, joking that she had the same problem with men. It wasn't entirely true. She had been seeing someone new, and from what I had seen, it was serious. After a pause, I voiced something that had been gnawing at me. Maybe the problem was me. Maybe I had unresolved issues, things I hadn't dealt with, things that kept me from truly moving forward. Angela didn't sugarcoat it. She pointed out that I had never truly confronted the biggest question that haunted me. Why did Brittany cheat? It was something I had avoided for years, never bothering to ask, never wanting to hear the answer. But maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe I needed to know. I scoffed at the idea. What good would talking to Brittany do now? But Angela's response was simple. What did I have to lose? She had a point. Maybe it was time to finally get some answers. That Sunday, when I dropped the kids off at Brittany's house, I did something I had never done before. I got out of the car with them. Both Daniel and Brian looked at me in shock. Brian seemed nervous, while Daniel, more perceptive, looked outright worried. I reassured them that I wasn't there to cause a scene or try to reconcile, just to have a conversation with their mother. They nodded, though neither looked convinced. As I knocked on the door, Brittany took longer than expected to answer. When she finally did, her eyes widened in surprise before narrowing in irritation. She looked the same, still effortlessly beautiful, her blonde hair slightly longer, her small frame as striking as ever. Even in her cafe uniform, where she worked as a manager, she still had that magnetic presence. But that no longer mattered. She questioned my presence immediately, her tone laced with suspicion. I told her I needed to talk, motioning toward our kids who were watching from the porch. She didn't take the hint until I asked for privacy. Huffing, she ordered them inside before turning back to me, her expression hostile. Her sarcasm was immediate, but I ignored it. I had one question, and I wanted the truth. Why did you cheat on me? She froze, completely unprepared for the question. At first, she lashed out, demanding why I was bringing this up now, nearly a year and a half after our divorce. I told her honestly, I had been too angry back then to care about the why. But time had passed, and now I wanted to understand. Predictably, she tried to deflect, implying I was blaming everything on her. I reminded her that she had been the one who had broken our vows, not me. I had never even considered cheating. What we had built was too valuable to throw away. Ready to tell me? Fine, I hadn't expected an answer anyway. Her expression shifted, a storm of emotions flickering across her face as she seemed to wrestle with herself before finally lowering her gaze. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I had always been curious about being with another woman. That wasn't what I expected. She admitted she had thought about it for a long time but had been too afraid of judgment. In college, she had opportunities but never went through with them. Then one day, Jamie had opened up to her about having similar desires. At first, Brittany hadn't realized that Jamie was interested in her, but one night alone in the gym locker room, Jamie made her move. Brittany didn't resist. She claimed it wasn't about being gay. She still liked men, but she had discovered she was drawn to more than that. She knew I would never forgive even a single betrayal, even if she had stopped after that first time. She believed it wouldn't have made a difference. I reminded her that she had been right about that from the very beginning. I had been clear about my views on monogamy. She hesitated before admitting that it hadn't been an easy decision, but I found that hard to believe. After 11 years together, she had thrown everything away for a brief thrill. As much as she tried to explain, I still couldn't understand why. For the first time in a long while, she looked at me without anger, just regret, but it was too little, too late. Despite my promise to the kids to stay calm, I felt my temper flare. I forced myself to rein it in, but the truth remained. No matter how much time had passed, I would never be able to forgive what she had done. When I asked about Ben, Brittany sighed and admitted he wasn't part of her initial betrayal. He had joined one of her gym classes and then became a personal training client. Their conversations drifted into reminiscing. Brittany explained that at first, she had rejected Ben's advances. But then came Jamie. After that first night with her, Brittany said the guilt disappeared. She knew I'd never forgive her, so in her mind, it no longer mattered. With the boundaries already broken, she indulged in every fantasy she had suppressed, one of which involved multiple partners. Ben had been eager to participate. First, she slept with him alone for a few weeks. Then she got the threesome she wanted. And she would have continued if I hadn't found out. She spoke with detachment, as if it had all been inevitable. It sickened me, but I understood her twisted logic. Once she crossed the first line, there was no reason to stop. I regretted asking. Angela had thought getting answers would bring me closure, but it only confirmed what I had suspected. I had never been enough for her. Instead of being honest with me, she had chased her selfish desires without a second thought. Brittany shrugged. It wasn't personal, she claimed. She hadn't even considered my feelings until she got caught. She didn't mean to hurt me or intend to destroy our marriage, but her mother was right. She was weak. Oddly enough, that realization brought some relief. This hadn't happened because of anything I lacked. Brittany had sabotaged herself. She had thrown away 11 years, a family, and a stable life for nothing. That wasn't my burden to carry. I asked if she had ever truly loved me. She said she had, maybe even still did in some way. She claimed to regret hurting me, though she admitted that for an entire year, she had acted without remorse. She had been faithful until Jamie. After that, she had stopped caring. Then, as if I were the villain, she turned on me. I had destroyed her life. I had ruined her reputation, her relationship with her parents, her job. She blamed me for everything that had gone wrong. I reminded her she had been. I reminded Brittany that she had been warned. She had a choice. She could have given me what I wanted in the divorce, but instead, she fought me. She had underestimated me. She called me vindictive, saying my pride couldn't handle that she needed more than I could give. I corrected her. If she had felt that way, she could have been honest. She could have left me before betraying me. That would have been painful, but at least I would have respected her. Instead, she had chosen deception. I was done. She wasn't worth my anger anymore. She wasn't worth anything to me. I turned to leave, but to my surprise, she stopped me. She had questions too. She wanted to know why I had given up on her so easily, why I hadn't fought for her. The question was absurd. I reminded her of our conversations before marriage, how I had made it clear that cheating was the one thing I would never tolerate. She had known that long before we said our vows. The moment she slept with someone else, she had made her choice, and there had been nothing left to fight for. Brittany trembled, barely holding back tears, but she composed herself enough to ask one last question. How had I found out? She insisted they had been careful, that I had never changed my routines. I almost laughed at the irony. It had all been a complete accident. I explained how a simple issue with corrupted files had led me to check Google Earth, ultimately exposing everything. As I spoke, her expression shifted from disbelief to resignation. Sinking onto a metal chair on her porch, she admitted how absurd it all was. Of all things, it had been satellite imagery that unraveled her secrets. Then, in a rare moment of sincerity, she apologized. Not just for cheating, but for everything. She acknowledged that her anger toward me had really been self-directed. She also confessed that she had told the kids the divorce was her fault, though without details. At least she had done that much. I thanked her for it, mostly for the kids' sake, then walked away. That was the last real conversation we had for a long time. Another year passed, and my life remained much the same. I continued dating occasionally, but nothing meaningful ever developed. At some point, I had accepted that deep relationships might no longer be in the cards for me. Over time, the bitterness faded. My focus was on my kids, and watching them grow brought more fulfillment than anything else. Brian, now 10, was showing an interest in landscaping, especially Japanese rock gardens. Meanwhile, Danielle, at 12, was gravitating toward healthcare. More notably, she was starting to notice boys, a shift that made me more protective than ever. Her newfound interest was one of the reasons I agreed to chaperone the school dance that fall. Angela and her husband Mike had also pushed me into it, and schools were always in need of volunteers. The event itself was chaos. Kids overloaded on sugar, blaring music that made me feel ancient at 37. I was so distracted by the scene that I almost didn't notice her, the woman across the gym who, according to Angela, had been watching me all night. She was stunning, a brunette in a cream and charcoal sweater, with curves that made her stand out even in a crowded room. She moved with confidence, and I realized she was probably around my age. Angela nudged me toward her, and for the first time in a long while, I decided to take a chance. It was time to move forward. The moment she turned, her striking green eyes caught my attention. I had never seen a shade quite like that and briefly wondered if they were natural or enhanced by contacts. Closing the distance between us, I introduced myself as Danielle and Brian's father. She smiled warmly and extended her hand, introducing herself as Dawn Rogers. The name made me chuckle internally, Dawn and Dawn. That was sure to turn heads in social settings. She explained that she was Greg's mother and also taught 6th grade at the school. Then, with a teasing tone, she pointed out how rare it was to see a single father volunteering as a chaperone. I shrugged, saying my kids were worth it and that I had no other plans for the evening, but her observation made me curious. How had she known I was single? Her answer was simple, no wedding ring, and the woman I'd been with all evening was there with her husband. She had a sharp eye for details, a skill that clearly came from her work with children. As we talked, I realized I was still holding her hand. Embarrassed, I let go, but she laughed, assuring me it was fine. That laugh, light, genuine, and inviting, stuck with me. There was something about her presence that drew me in, something beyond her captivating eyes and effortless charm. We spent the next several minutes exchanging stories about our kids. I shared how Danielle was considering a future in healthcare and how Brian loved helping with landscaping. Dawn told me about Greg's fascination with electronics and his early attempts at hacking, which had gotten him into a few minor scrapes. The conversation was so engaging that I barely noticed Angela sneaking up on me for the second time that night, announcing it was time to gather the kids. The DJ was packing up, and the sugar-fueled chaos was finally winding down. As we helped round up the children and ensured they all left with the right parents, the exhaustion of the night set in. The kids were coming down from their sugar highs, meaning I might actually get some quiet when I got home. As we walked toward the parking lot, Dawn surprised me by taking my arm and slipping a folded note into my shirt pocket. She casually mentioned that she'd like to have dinner sometime and walked off with Greg before I could even react. That night felt like a turning point. I didn't wait long to call her. I couldn't wait. She was impossible to get out of my head. Our first dinner date was simple, ending not in the bedroom but with an unforgettable kiss that left no doubt about our mutual attraction. She was interested but not in a rush, and I respected that. Dawn was a woman of depth, intelligent, practical, and resourceful. Like me, she wasn't wealthy, but she had mastered the art of stretching every. Dawn was incredibly resourceful. She shared clever money-saving tricks that helped me free up finances in ways I hadn't thought of before. In return, I discovered her passion for gardening, though she had no natural talent for it. She loved flowering vines and trees, but struggled to keep anything alive. Fortunately, that was an area where I thrived, and I enjoyed teaching her simple ways to revive struggling plants. Together, we transformed her backyard into a cozy outdoor living space with minimal cost. When we finally took things to the next level physically, it only deepened our connection. Dawn's presence was intoxicating, her touch soft and inviting, her energy effortlessly sensual. She was open to new experiences, and over time, we explored different ways to deepen our intimacy, both emotionally and physically. As our relationship grew, I eventually told her about Brittany and then Mandy. Her reaction was different from anyone else's. While surprised, she wasn't particularly bothered by my decision to expose Brittany's betrayal online. She believed in consequences and, all things considered, thought my ex had gotten off easy. Dawn was wonderful with my kids, and her son, Greg, fits seamlessly into our lives. He and Danielle, being in the same grade, got along well, making family outings easy and natural. Things were going so well that, at the 8-month mark, I found myself considering something I hadn't in years: marriage. Dwelling on Mandy's rejection wasn't an option. I refused to let past disappointments dictate my future. Of course, there was a possibility that Dawn might turn me down, but I didn't think she would. Regardless, I was prepared for whatever came next. Before making any big moves, I discussed it with my kids. Danielle was thrilled, while Brian was less enthusiastic. Deep down, I suspected he still held on to the hope that his mother and I would reunite. After settling on a ring, all that remained was deciding how to propose. Was no easy task. Eventually, I chose my upcoming 40th birthday party, just 2 weeks away, as the perfect moment. The gathering wouldn't be large, just close friends, family, and of course, Dawn and Greg. To make the surprise even more special, I secretly invited her parents and brother, hoping to make the night even more memorable. The hardest part of the wait was ensuring the kids didn't accidentally spill the secret and making sure my excitement didn't give it away. Finally, the evening arrived. Though my actual birthday had been the day before, we planned the celebration for Friday. My parents had rented a private dining space at Misha's, a cozy, budget-friendly Russian restaurant that was also kid-friendly. Dinner was fantastic, full of laughter, great food, and even a little dancing. As the night progressed, we reached the gift-opening portion of the evening. I unwrapped each present, thanking everyone for their thoughtful gestures while doing my best to keep my real plan under wraps. Dawn was pleasantly surprised to see her family there, but didn't question it much. With the last gift set aside, I knew it was time. Wrapping an arm around Dawn, I pulled her close. As she leaned into me, I grinned at everyone and expressed my gratitude for making my birthday so special. A light-hearted joke got some chuckles from the crowd, and as the laughter died down, Angela discreetly slipped the ring box into my hand before vanishing back into the crowd. Taking a deep breath, I announced that there was one final thing before the night ended. I had received many wonderful gifts, but there was still one more I hoped for. Turning to Dawn, I took a knee and held up the ring, my voice steady as I asked her to marry me. Silence settled over the room as the realization of what was happening sank in. Everyone, including the kids, held their breath. I watched Dawn closely, waiting for the excitement, the joy, the yes I had expected. But it never came. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. Suddenly overwhelmed, her voice wavered as she muttered something unintelligible, stepping back. Then, with barely another word, she grabbed Greg's hand and rushed out of the restaurant, not even stopping to put on her coat. The shock in the room was palpable. Everyone stared at me, unsure of what to say or do. Forcing a smile, I shrugged off the awkwardness, thanked everyone for coming, and wished them a good night. As I gathered my things, my eyes fell on the ring box still sitting on the table. I resisted the urge to hurl it across the room like I had the last time. Instead, I pocketed it, figuring I might as well get a refund. Before leaving, my mother gently took my hand and offered to take the kids for the night. I barely cared at that point, but when I asked them, Brian eagerly agreed. Danielle, however, lingered, her voice soft as she whispered an apology. I reassured her that she had nothing to be sorry for, though I wasn't ready to hear any sympathy. She wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug before gathering her things and following my mother to the car. My father stayed behind for a moment, watching me with an unreadable expression. "So that's strike 3, huh?" I muttered bitterly. His response was simple. "Yeah. But life gives you more than one at-bat." I forced a laugh, joking that at least my taste in women remained solid. He sighed, reminding me that life eventually takes a swing at everyone. I wasn't alone in this, and I needed to focus on moving forward. He assured me they'd always be there for the kids and for me. With that, I grabbed my coat and left, letting Angela and Mike handle the bill. Angela looked like she wanted to talk, but Mike stopped her, sensing that I wasn't in the mood. Right now, the last thing I needed was sympathy. The drive home was mercifully short. As soon as I stepped inside, I locked the door, tossed my belongings on the couch, and reached for a drink. Unfortunately, my stock of beer was nowhere near enough to numb the disappointment. The thought of a liquor run briefly crossed my mind. A store run crossed my mind, but I dismissed it quickly. Waking up with a raging hangover wasn't how I wanted to start the next day. Instead, I sank into my chair and let old 80s sitcoms on Netflix fill the silence. Hours passed, and exhaustion finally crept in. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a stiff back from sleeping in that damn chair and a desperate need for the bathroom. Dragging myself through my morning routine, I took a hot shower, popped some aspirin, and made breakfast. I tried to push thoughts of Dawn from my mind, but they clung stubbornly, more painful than my lingering headache. Something had gone wrong. I had been so sure of her feelings, the way she looked at me, the way we fit together. It had felt inevitable. Yet, my mind, ever the betrayer, reminded me that I had felt the same certainty when I proposed to Mandy. Frustrated, I made a decision. Marriage was officially off the table. No more proposals. No more wasted effort. From now on, relationships would be casual. Nothing serious. With that resolve, I finished eating, cleaned up, and went straight to the basement to hit the weights. Pushing my body to its limits helped burn off some of the restless energy and frustration. Another shower followed, and as I dried off, I realized I hadn't turned on my phone since the night before. The moment I powered it on, notifications flooded in, missed calls, voicemails, messages. I skimmed through them, mostly sympathy from friends, a few offers to talk. The voicemails were much of the same, except for one.
Dawn.
Her message was short, barely a whisper. I'm sorry, my love. Please believe I have my reasons. I hope you'll someday understand and forgive me.
Goodbye.
I ignored it along with all the others. The rest of the day passed in a haze of mindless television until my parents brought the kids home that evening. Now, 10 years have passed since my divorce.
Danielle is in.
Danielle is in college, pursuing nursing, while Brian just graduated high school and plans to study business. Maybe he'll take over the family landscaping company one day. Time will tell. I'm 45 and still single. I've had flings, but nothing lasting. A year ago, Mandy resurfaced, looking for nothing more than fun. This time, she was upfront about it. We spent a couple of months together before she moved on again. No expectations, no heartbreak. She asked why I never remarried, and I gave her the truth. It wasn't worth the risk. Of course, I wanted a wife, someone to wake up next to every morning, someone who would stay. But life had made it clear that wasn't in the cards for me. Some stories don't end with happily ever after. Dawn's family sought me out a year after my proposal, hoping I could convince her to come back. Apparently, she had left town. They thought I could be the reason she returned, but I found it ironic, considering the idea of being with me was probably what made her leave in the first place. I didn't ask for details. She never explained her reasons, and honestly, I didn't care. Brittany, on the other hand, moved on and remarried. For years, Brian and Danielle tried to mend things between us, but I had no interest. People don't change. She had been a cheater, and no amount of regret or therapy would rewrite history. Eventually, they stopped trying, and she settled down with the cafe owner she had been working for. The kids say she's happy. Good for her. I just hope for his sake. She signed a prenup. She's still a stunning woman after all. A few months ago, I lost my father. His passing left the business fully in my hands, but it also took a toll on my mother. She's struggling, and I worry she won't hold on much longer. The grief is written all over her face. My parents had the kind of marriage I always wanted, one built on love, trust, and true partnership. But looking back, I wonder if that kind of love was ever real for me. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it never did. I'm not the philosophical type. I work with my hands, shape landscapes, and let others ponder the meaning of life. When Mandy left for the second time, she asked me a question. Do you have any regrets? Of course I did. I regretted marrying Brittany. I regretted wasting time on relationships that were never meant to last. I regretted never finding someone who truly shared my values. But I knew what she really meant. She wanted to know if I regretted exposing Brittany, if I regretted the divorce, the hatred, the years of bitterness. The answer was simple, no. I regretted that it had to happen, but I never regretted doing it. She had earned every consequence. If I had the chance to do it all again, I wouldn't change a thing. Maybe in the end, I even saved her new husband some trouble. If so, then at least something good came out of it. As for me, I'll keep working. I'll watch my children grow, look forward to my future grandkids, and who knows, maybe one day I'll meet someone who changes my mind about marriage. But I'm not searching anymore. I'll enjoy whatever happiness I can find, in whatever form it takes. It's not the life I planned, but it's not a bad one. And yes, in my free time at work, I still sometimes indulge in a bird's eye view. Like and subscribe my channel Life Black Aspect for more videos.